Some people wonder what the genesis for this show was, and although I've kind of for a while known I wanted to write something like this, it really got sparked back in 2009 with the whole incident with Professor Henry Louis Gates of Harvard coming home and being arrested for disorderly conduct in his kitchen. And I had written a piece, a spoken word piece recently about an incident back in college when I had moved into a new apartment and found myself in my living room trying to prove, going through boxes trying to prove to the cops that I lived there. Another thing interesting about this piece as it's evolved, things will happen. So I wrote a piece called Convenience Stores, which is in a play which talks about what it's like as a large black man to go into a convenience store late at night and how I always find myself being overly friendly. Hi, I'm here to shop, not to steal, not to kill anybody. And how actually during my other play, when I was a bulimic, I would visit convenience stores a lot, and often late at night. My things were big gulps and hot dogs. And I had written a piece kind of about that, and then the whole Trayvon Martin incident came up where this kid was walking home with Skittles and his own iced tea. And there's a piece in the show which talks about to be young, black, and innocent in the world today, and that's where the whole line about conjuncture and statistics and all these things are thrust upon young, black, and innocent males, regardless of whether they're participating in anything criminal. So those are kind of a couple of ideas, a couple of themes that run throughout the piece. The Skip Gates one, the Henry Louis Gates one, was really poignant because I thought we would finally have this conversation, because everybody wants a conversation on race, and people ask, like, when are we going to have this? And it's always interesting because it's an ongoing conversation. For me, it's always like the conversation is continuous in nature, and if you only want to have the conversation after some racially charged incident, that's a problem there. I also find interesting that race is the one thing that everybody somehow in many ways has what I call equal voice and footing, regardless of what they bring to the table. So I've never been skiing. I know you know, never know nothing about skiing, haven't run a marathon either. So if I were to engage in a conversation about skiing or marathon, I wouldn't have as much weight. When I said wouldn't carry much weight as one of those athletes, but somehow the fact that I am a transracial adoptee, the fact that I grew up for the first 18 years, and then when I was in college, I was socialized as a white child, afforded pretty much all the privileges that were afforded unto those kids, with my parents or what have you, that I wouldn't have a little more to say or a different, unique perspective. One of the early moments that people often ask, like, when did you know about privilege and identity? And the fact is, I didn't have the language. I didn't run around like, oh, I have honorary white and suburban privilege. But I do remember things. I remember going into stores with my mother, who doesn't like to shop. I remember going into stores alone. And I realized at a relatively young age, perhaps junior high, that if I could let everybody in that store know that that white woman was my mother, that suddenly I wasn't being followed or seen as a perceived shoplifter. So sometimes I would grab a blouse, yes, I said blouse, and wave and say, Mom, can I get this? And she's like, no! And that was the clarion call. I also realized at a young age, it's a racial problem at school. Kids would call me names. And when I had it up here, I would call my mom and she would come up. And I realized that they took my mom serious. I went to a predominantly white school because they couldn't dismiss her as like the crazy black woman, which often, white school administrators had done. So these are several of the themes that kind of come up through the play. As I write it and continue to work on it, the older I get, certainly things some are interesting, some are still sad. The whole idea about the writing in cars comes from is, so when I went away to college, I had to get a car. And so my dad and I went out and bought a 1976 Mercury Grand Marquis, neither of us knowing that it was a hoopty or a traditionally black car. And all the trouble that happened that first year. And I don't think a black parent would have ever sent their kid to a college, a whiter college, even in a whiter town, in that automobile. And how I rode that for a year, and at the end of the year, not to give too much away because I want you to come see the play, I literally came onto a lot crying in Tacoma and just thinking to myself and exclaiming out loud, I need to buy the whitest car on that lot. And I did. And lo and behold, it was a totally new experience.